The desert wind carried a low hum that morning, the kind that made the cottonwoods tremble and set nerves on edge. Folks in the small frontier town gathered near the open-air chapel, dust coating their boots as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Whispers floated through the air like dry leaves, all of them circling around the same uneasy question. Why was the young woman being forced to marry a man she did not look at with even a trace of warmth? And why did she kneel so still, hands pressed together as if the ground itself was holding her in place? Her name was Leora, known across the valley for her kindness and the quiet strength she carried in her eyes. She had grown up under the old American sun, tending ranch chores with bare hands, moving with the gentleness of someone who understood both hardship and hope. Today she wore a white dress that should have belonged to a willing bride, yet the fabric felt heavy and wrong against her skin. Her heart was pounding like a trapped bird. She kept her gaze fixed on the dirt so no one would see the storm inside her. Beside her stood the man she was being married to, a wealthy landowner named Calderon. He carried himself with pride, chin lifted high, silver buttons shining on his dark jacket. To the crowd, he looked like a strong suitor. But to Leora, he was the one who had cornered her family into a deal they could not escape. He had taken advantage of their debts and demanded her hand to settle what they owed. She had refused many times, but pressure came from every direction until she could no longer breathe beneath it. Behind the wooden altar, the priest lifted his hand to bless the ceremony, though his eyes showed worry. Even he sensed something wrong. A forced marriage cast a shadow no prayer could hide. Leora saw her father in the crowd, shoulders slumped, jaw tight with guilt he could not shake. He knew he had failed to protect her, trapped by debt and threats. He mouthed a silent apology she could not answer. The sun was sinking low, throwing orange light across the dust as the moment pressed closer. Calderon extended his hand toward her, expecting obedience. He wanted her life, her land, her future. But what he truly feared was the one person Leora did not speak of. The one man who had once protected her from danger with nothing but courage and honor. A fierce Apache warrior known across the plains as Cale. No one in town knew the truth about them, not fully. They only knew she had once helped Cale when he was wounded near the riverbed after a skirmish. They knew she had pulled him from danger and kept him hidden in her old barn until he recovered strength. What they did not know was how silently their hearts had changed during those quiet nights. How Cale had spoken to her with respect no man in the valley had ever offered. How he had promised that if she ever called for help, he would cross any distance to reach her. Weeks passed with no sign of him, and some believed he had forgotten her. Others believed he had no place in her life. Leora herself had stopped hoping after her family's debt closed around her like a cage. She had prayed he would ride into town one more time, but the horizon stayed empty. Now, as she knelt before the altar and the priest began speaking, she felt a strange tremble in the ground. At first, she thought it was only her heartbeat. Then it grew louder. Hooves. Powerful. Fast. Cutting through the quiet ceremony like thunder. A sound of warning rose among the crowd as a cloud of dust lifted from the far edge of the road. Children stepped back. Men reached for their belts. Calderon stiffened. The priest froze mid-sentence. Leora felt the hairs on her arms rise as she lifted her head slowly, her chest tightening with fear and hope mixed together. From the dust came a single rider, muscular, bronze-skinned, hair tied back with tribal cords, eyes sharp as hawk wings. His horse flew across the ground, kicking up sand and sunlight. Every person in the chapel knew him at once. Cale, the Apache warrior known for fearlessness and fire. The one men respected and feared in equal measure. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Cale pushed the stallion toward the altar with unwavering force. Leora's breath caught. She had dreamed of seeing him again, but never like this. It's not in front of the whole town. It's not in the middle of a forced marriage she could not escape. Calderon shot a glare full of anger and warning. He stepped forward as if ready to defend what he believed belonged to him. But Cale did not slow. His voice tore through the ceremony with raw determination. He called her name in a tone that made every soul turn cold. Leora felt tears sting her eyes, the kind that came not from fear but from something deeper, something she had buried under the weight of duty. The priest stumbled back as Cale pulled the reins and the horse reared, throwing dust across the altar. The crowd stepped away, stunned at the sight of the warrior who seemed carved from fire and earth. The tension between the two men grew heavy, thick enough to silence everything around them. Cale leaped down from the saddle in a fluid motion, boots striking the ground with strength. His chest rose and fell with fury, but his eyes locked on Leora with a softness only she knew. In that brief moment she remembered the riverbank, the laughter they had shared, the quiet promise he had once made. She had thought he would never return. Now he was here, storming into her fate without hesitation. Calderon's men stepped forward, forming a barrier between the warrior and the altar. But Cale stood taller, unshaken. He did not reach for any weapon. He did not shout or threaten. He only spoke with the power of a man who had come to stop something unjust. He asked Leora a single question that cut through the heavy silence. A question that held the truth she had been afraid to speak. Did she want this union? Her lips trembled. The priest looked at her with a mix of fear and sympathy. Her father lowered his head. Calderon's jaw tightened, expecting her answer to follow his will. Leora tried to breathe, but her voice felt trapped. All she saw was the long road behind her, filled with the weight of family duty and silent suffering. And then she saw Cale, the one person who had never treated her like property or payment. The one who had come bursting into the ceremony because he sensed her pain without being told. Her voice finally broke free, but before she could answer, Calderon grabbed her arm sharply, pulling her to her feet as the crowd gasped. The force made Cale step forward instantly, eyes blazing like the burning plains. In that tense heartbeat, the ceremony shattered. The moment cracked open like thunder. Before anyone could react, something happened that changed the entire valley's fate forever. The crowd stood frozen as Caleron pulled Leora upright, his grip tight and warning. Dust hung in the air like a veil while the wind pushed against the chapel posts, groaning as if the land itself felt the rising storm. Cale's boots sank into the dirt as he stepped closer, every movement controlled, strong and grounded. He didn't reach for his bow or blade. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to shift the balance of the entire valley. Leora steadied herself, fighting the shake in her knees. She felt Calderon's fingers biting into her arm, but she also felt the silent pull of Cale's gaze, urging her to stay brave. The same determination she once saw in him when he told her he would never stand aside if she ever faced danger. She had thought it was only a promise spoken under a quiet night sky. Now she realized he had meant every word. People murmured around them, unsure of what they were witnessing. Some feared Cale, remembering stories of raids from years before, though none of them had actually met him. Others stared at Calderon with suspicion, finally seeing the truth they had ignored. This was not a peaceful wedding. This was a transaction forced under pressure. The priest raised his hands as if trying to calm both sides. His voice wavered, but he tried to speak. Before he could finish, Calderon ordered him to stay silent. He wanted control, and he was ready to turn the entire valley against the Apache warrior if needed. The anger in his eyes showed he expected everyone to obey him. Cale's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. He asked again if Leora wanted to continue the ceremony. This time his voice was calmer, but it carried a weight that made the crowd lean forward. No one had ever asked her what she wanted. Not her father, not the priest, not Calderon, only Cale. Leora opened her mouth, but fear tangled her throat. She looked at her father, hoping he would finally stand for her. His shoulders dropped even lower. He couldn't meet her eyes. He had been backed into a corner so deeply by debt that he had convinced himself. Sacrificing her was the only way to protect the family. She wanted to forgive him, but the pain of his silence cut deeper than she expected. Men from Calderon's ranch shifted their stance, some stepping protectively beside their employer. They didn't care about right or wrong. They cared about loyalty and pay. Calderon paid well. Their hands hovered near belts, not grabbing weapons yet, but ready to escalate if he gave the order. Cale noticed, but he did not flinch. He had grown up among warriors who understood that strength came not from rage but from control. He scanned the faces of the ranch hands, reading their uncertainty. He knew most of them didn't want to start a fight. They only wanted to keep their homes and jobs. But Calderon's pride was a different kind of fire. It consumed reason. Leora's breath grew shallow as Calderon pulled her a step behind him, as if she were property he needed to shield from the man who challenged his claim. Cale saw this, and his expression darkened. He spoke again, this time telling Calderon that no union built through fear would stand. The warrior's voice shook the air, steady but intense. Reminded the crowd that every person deserved their own choice, especially when it came to marriage. For a moment, the entire world felt like it paused. Even the wind stilled. Then Calderon forced a laugh that carried no humor. He accused Cale of trespassing and disrupting what he called a sacred ceremony. He claimed that the warrior had no right to interfere in matters that belonged to their community. He spoke loudly so the town would hear and side with him. Why he wanted to paint Cale as an intruder, not a protector. Some townsfolk nodded uneasily, unsure who to believe. Others turned their eyes to Leora, watching her trembling hands, sensing that she held the answer to the entire conflict. But she stayed silent, trapped between two forces. Cale's eyes softened when he looked at her, remembering the time she had saved his life. Months earlier, he had been ambushed near the shallow river that cut through her land. He had been injured, barely able to walk, and Leora had found him while tending her cattle. She had taken him into her barn, hidden him beneath old blankets, and treated his wounds with herbs she learned from her grandmother. They spoke in whispers while the world outside hunted him. She had asked nothing from him. She had feared nothing from him. And he had seen in her a spirit stronger than most warriors he knew. Those quiet days had shaped a bond neither of them named, yet it existed, stronger than words. Leora remembered that time too. She remembered the way Cale listened without interrupting. How he respected every boundary, how he never reached for her hand without permission, how he thanked her each morning, even when he could barely speak. She remembered how safe she felt around him, something she hadn't felt in years. He left after he healed, giving her a carved stone pendant shaped like a hawk. She still wore it beneath her dress, hidden from her father in Calderon. Now here he was, standing in front of the entire valley because he had sensed something wrong. She wondered how he even knew about the ceremony. She wondered how far he had ridden. She wondered if this meant he had never forgotten her. Before she could gather her thoughts, one of Calderon's men stepped forward and threatened Cale, telling him to leave before things escalated. Cale's shoulders straightened, but he kept his voice steady. He told them he had no intention of harming anyone unless they forced him to. The tension between both sides thickened, gripping the air like a rope pulled too tight. Leora suddenly remembered something Cale once told her while she was stitching his wounded shoulder. He said the plains always warned him before danger struck. The wind would change. The animals would fall silent, and the earth would vibrate under his feet. He trusted those signs more than he trusted any man. Now she felt the same warning inside herself. Something bigger than this argument was building. This moment was not just about a wedding. It was about lines that had been crossed, secrets that had been buried, and a truth she had been too afraid to speak. Calderon tightened his grip on her arm again, pushing her behind him as if to hide her. But Cale saw the fear flash across her face. Something inside him shifted. Not rage, not impulse, but a deep, steady resolve. He stepped closer, his voice low, controlled, powerful. He told Calderon that no man had the right to force another soul into a bond they did not choose. He said Leora deserved freedom, not duty built on debt. Calderon's jaw clenched. He finally barked the order for his men to surround Cale. The ranch hands hesitated, caught between loyalty and doubt. A few stepped forward, trying to appear strong, but their boots dragged in the sand. Fear whispered beneath their movements. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the chapel floor. Leora felt her breath catch as Cale slowly lifted his chin, ready to defend himself if he must. The horse behind him snorted, sensing the growing danger. Then, in the middle of the rising tension, a distant sound broke through the air. Not hooves, not wind, something else. A warning drum echo from the far side of the valley. Few people recognized it, but Leora saw how Cale's expression changed. That sound meant something to him, something urgent. Before he could respond, Calderon stepped closer to the warrior, lowering his voice so only Cale and Leora could hear. He told Cale that even if he fought every man in the valley, the outcome would remain the same. Leora would marry him. The land would be his, and the Apache warrior would be driven out, or worse. Cale stared back at him with a calm that masked something heavy beneath it. Not fear, something else, a secret he hadn't revealed yet. Leora sensed it, feeling the tension rise inside her like a rising storm. She wanted to speak. She wanted to choose. She wanted to take one step toward the man who had come to save her. But her voice locked again as the ranch hands closed in and the valley grew quiet. The moment thickened, the air trembling with everything unsaid. And just as Cale opened his mouth to speak, something unexpected shifted behind the chapel, forcing every head to turn and leaving the entire valley hanging in a silence that felt ready to break open. Every head turned toward the sound behind the chapel. The dust swirled in slow circles, and even the horses lifted their ears. A rider appeared at the edge of town, but this rider did not charge in like Cale. Instead, he moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if he carried news that could shift the valley's fate. The man wore a travel-worn coat and carried a satchel heavy with papers. Leora recognized him as Rowan, a messenger who traveled between the settlements and ranches. He rarely came unless something urgent pushed him over long miles. Rowan's horse halted, restless from the tension choking the air. The messenger looked at the crowd, then at the priest, then at Leora, then finally at Calderon. His expression hinted that whatever he carried mattered enough to interrupt even a wedding ceremony. Calderon clearly saw Rowan's presence as a threat and stepped forward, demanding to know what business he had here. Rowan dismounted with care and held out a folded document sealed with an unfamiliar mark. He claimed it came from a land commissioner in the capital, claimed it concerned ownership disputes over large ranch territories across the region. That word alone, ownership, made several men in the crowd shift anxiously. Rumors had been spreading for months that the government planned to reevaluate border lines. Some feared losing land. There's hope to gain it. When Rowan handed the document to Calderon, silence rippled across the valley once more. Calderon tore it open impatiently, scanning the lines quickly. Leora watched his eyes narrow. Whatever he read troubled him. He folded the paper fast, hiding its contents from everyone. Cale noted the move, his expression sharpening. Leora sensed Calderon's growing desperation. If his land holdings were threatened, it explained why he pushed so hard for the marriage. Her family's ranch sat at a key border that could secure his entire estate. Calderon barked at Rohan, claiming the message was political nonsense and meant nothing here. But the messenger didn't leave. Instead, he looked toward Leora with sympathy. He had heard whispers of her forced engagement along the trail. Traders talked, settlers talked, people cared more than Calderon believed. Rowan told the crowd the document would be discussed publicly in the coming days. The town would need to hear it. This unexpected subplot unsettled everyone. For the first time, the valley sensed that Calderon's control was not as unshakable as it seemed. Calderon ordered Rowan to leave immediately. Rowan hesitated, then mounted and rode out again, dust trailing behind him. The tension that had eased for a moment returned thicker than before. Now the crowd had more reasons to doubt Calderon's intentions. Cale stepped slightly in front of Leora as Calderon's frustration grew. The warrior's protective stance was quiet, not aggressive, but it said everything. Leora felt something strange stirring inside her. For the first time, she noticed uncertainty in the crowd's faces. People who previously feared speaking against Calderon were starting to question him. Even the ranch hands looked uneasy. They had joined him for work and security, not for a marriage built on force and secrets. Before anyone could speak again, an elderly woman from the crowd stepped forward. Her name was Nael, known in the valley for tending healing herbs and midwife duties. She had always been kind to Leora. She pointed at Cale and reminded everyone that Leora had once saved a wounded man near her property. She said it was an act of courage that should be honored, not hidden. Some of the townsfolk nodded, remembering how Leora had always treated others with fairness. Their support was small, but growing. Calderon silenced them with a snap of his voice. He claimed that Cale's arrival was planned to intimidate the valley and disrupt order. He warned them that siding with an Apache could bring danger. But his words didn't hold the same weight as before. More doubts simmered quietly beneath the surface. Cale sensed the shift, but he didn't speak. Instead, he looked toward the far horizon again. Leora saw that the distant drum sound still lingered in his mind. She wanted to ask what it meant, but she didn't dare interrupt the rising conflict. The drumbeat might have been a warning or a call. Maybe it signaled trouble among Cale's own people, something he had not told her, something important. The unknown made her chest tighten. Meanwhile, Calderon regained himself and declared the ceremony would continue. He pulled Leora close again, lifting her arm as if proof of ownership. She winced, and that small sound cut into Cale deeper than any blade. Calderon told the priest to resume the vows immediately. The priest hesitated. His conscience battled his fear. But Calderon's stare was sharp, and unyielding. Just as the priest lifted his voice again, Cale took a long step forward. The moment dropped into silence. The ranch hands moved in closer, ready to defend Calderon. But Cale didn't raise his hands. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply said no. Just one word. Quiet, but so firm it sliced the air. Calderon's rage flared openly now. He warned Cale that interfering would have consequences. Cale remained steady. Said Leora had the right to choose her own fate. Said taking her freedom through fear violated everything the land once stood for. He spoke in a way that awakened something buried deep inside Leora. She remembered stories her grandmother told about. Women choosing their path no matter the danger. She remembered how her mother once fought to keep their ranch independent despite drought and hardship. That strength lived in her blood, even if silence had covered it for years. Calderon motioned for his men to restrain Cale. They moved, but hesitation showed in their steps. No one wanted to start a fight in front of the entire valley. No one wanted to face Cale directly. The warrior's calm made him even more imposing. Leora found her voice trembling to life again. She called her father softly. He stepped from the crowd, shame weighing heavily across his features. She asked him why he made this deal, why he didn't tell her the truth about the debt. Her father's voice cracked. He explained how Calderon had threatened to take their ranch if they couldn't pay. He explained how creditors were circling, ready to swallow the land her family had worked for generations. He said he thought giving her hand was the only way to save them all. Leora felt pain rise inside her, pain for her father, but also pain for herself. She understood desperation. But she also understood that sacrificing her future for land was not the answer. Before she could speak, Calderon interrupted again, claiming her father was doing the honorable thing. At that moment, Nael raised her voice again, surprising everyone. She told the crowd that land bought through fear never stayed peaceful. She said the valley would remember this day for years and everyone would be judged by which side they chose. Her words shook the air in a different way, not like Cale's strength, but like truth rising from the earth. Aldarin turned on her sharply, ready to silence her, but he didn't get the chance. A new sound thundered from the east, hoofbeats, many this time. The crowd spun around, alarm spreading fast. Cale's eyes narrowed sharply. He recognized the rhythm. These riders were not from Calderon's ranch. They were not settlers. They belonged to a different force. A group Cale had hoped would stay far from the valley. The riders approached like a storm moving over sand. Dust swirled behind them as they came into view. Their presence brought a new layer of tension that wrapped around the ceremony like a tightening rope. Leora watched Cale's expression shift. Not fear, not surprise. Something deeper. Something complicated. Calderon stepped back, confused and irritated. He did not expect visitors. The crowd murmured uneasily. No one recognized the riders. Cale did. Leora felt her heart pound painfully as she looked at Cale, waiting for an explanation. He didn't speak. Silence said enough. These riders would not simply watch. They were here for a reason. Whatever that reason was, it would change everything. The valley held its breath as the riders closed in, their silhouettes moving through the dust like shadows from another world, ready to pull the entire conflict into a deeper storm none of them had prepared for. Dust rolled across the open ground as the approaching riders slowed near the chapel. The sunlight caught the edges of their horses' manes, turning them into streaks of fire. The crowd stepped back in nervous ripples. Children clung to skirts. Men shifted their weight, unsure whether to prepare for a fight or stand still and wait. Every breath in the valley seemed to pause. Cale took one step forward, his eyes narrowing with recognition. He knew these riders well. Their markings, their posture, their quiet discipline. They were not raiders, were envoys from his own people, led by a fierce warrior named Toran, known for walking the line between peace and conflict with unshakable conviction. Toran dismounted first, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. His presence alone brought a new weight to the tension already choking the valley. Leora watched Cale's expression shift with something sharp and conflicted, as if a part of him had hoped this moment would never come. Calderon lifted his chin, annoyed that someone else dared interrupt what he believed was his ceremony to control. He demanded to know their purpose, but Toran ignored him entirely. His attention fixed on Cale, and then briefly on Leora. His gaze lingered a second too long, not with suspicion, but with understanding. He saw the truth in her eyes before anyone explained it. Kale stepped closer to Torin, speaking in a voice low enough that only those nearest could hear. Torin listened quietly, his jaw tightening, his eyes scanning the valley and the hostile stances of the ranch hands. Torin's arrival meant something more than a show of support. It meant Kale had been summoned or warned by his people. Leora felt her heart tremble. She wondered if Kale had risked more than just danger by riding into this ceremony. She wondered if he had risked his standing among his own people. Calderon, growing impatient, ordered his men to hold their ground and demanded that Torin speak clearly.
Allie.
Torin finally met his stare, and the entire crowd felt the pressure shift. Torin announced that the nearby lands were being watched by officials and that any forced land exchange would bring consequences. His words hit Calderon harder than expected. Torin then added that Kale had come here on personal grounds, not under orders. The crowd whispered again, realizing this conflict was deeper than they thought. Calderon's anger grew hotter. He insisted Leora belonged to this community, not to outsiders. He claimed Kale had manipulated her. The ranch hands stiffened, unsure if Calderon was being truthful or desperate. Leora found her voice rising unexpectedly as she said she had never been manipulated by Kale. Her tone was clear and steady, surprising even herself. The crowd turned toward her. She said Kale had protected her without asking anything in return. She said this ceremony was not her choice. Calderon tried to silence her, but she took a bold step away from him. Kale felt something shift inside him when she moved. He wanted to shield her, but he also knew she needed to speak. Torin watched with a thoughtful expression, as if he were weighing Kale's bond with her against the responsibilities Kale carried among his people. Meanwhile, Rowan's message still burned at the edges of everyone's thoughts. The possibility that borders might change and land rights might be challenged brought anxiety and suspicion. The valley had always feared losing what little they had. Now the presence of both Kale's warriors and Calderon's ambition made the situation feel like a fuse waiting to be lit. Calderon regained himself and ordered the priest to resume the ceremony, insisting that no one had the authority to stop him. But the priest stepped back, refusing to continue. His conscience spoke louder than Calderon's threats. Calderon turned red with frustration. He warned everyone that disobeying him would cost them, but no one stepped forward to support him. Even his ranch hands looked hesitant. Kale stepped between Calderon and Leora, without touching her, a silent promise forming in his stance. Calderon's pride cracked. He reached for Leora's arm again, but Torin's voice cut through the air like a blade, warning him to stop. The crowd gasped. Tyrone rarely raised his voice, but when he did, it carried the weight of an entire nation. Calderon glared at Torin, then at Kale, then at the crowd. He felt control slipping from his hands and fear turned to rage. He pulled out the folded document Rowan had delivered. He shouted that once the new border lines were confirmed, he would own the territory regardless of any ceremony. The land commissioner's orders would give him everything he wanted. He claimed Leora's ranch sat on the most valuable strip of the valley and that he would take it by law if not by marriage. Gasps rippled again. The truth was out, finally exposed. Leora's father staggered as if struck. He realized Calderon had never meant to save their land, meant to swallow it completely. Kale's jaw hardened. He accused Calderon of using Leora as a shield to take territory. But Calderon only lifted his chin, saying that control was the only way to keep the valley safe. He called Kale a threat, an outsider who did not belong here. Torin stepped closer to Kale, giving him a warning look, reminding him that their own tribe had concerns about frontier tensions and territory disputes. Leora felt trapped again, this time between two worlds she cared about. Kale's people were trying to avoid conflict. Calderon wanted power. She was the piece both sides believed could shift the ground beneath them. Just when Calderon seemed ready to take another step forward, Torin announced something that made the entire crowd hold its breath. He said that Kale was being called back by his elders to attend an urgent council. Something dangerous was unfolding on their lands too. Something that concerned everyone in the valley. Torin warned Kale that staying here too long could cost him deeply. Leora felt her heart twist painfully. She realized Kale had risked defying his own people to stand by her side. The thought shook her to her core. Kale did not look away from her, even as Torin spoke. His silence held everything he could not say out loud, that he would choose her, he already had. Calderon sensed this connection, and it drove him deeper into desperation. He lunged forward, trying to drag Leora back to the altar. Cale reacted instantly, stepping in front of her. His voice thundered with a force that made even Torin pause. He warned Calderon to never touch her again. The valley held its breath. The ranch hands froze, torn between obedience and fear of Cale's wrath. The moment nearly snapped into violence when another sound rose in the distance. Not hooves, not drums, something else entirely. A cry. A call from the ridge overlooking the valley. Cale turned sharply. So did Torin. Their warriors stiffened in alarm. The sound carried a warning known only to the Apache, a message of threat closing in from the hills. Calderon did not recognize the meaning, but he knew it unsettled Cale. He tried to use that moment to claim victory, shouting that Cale should leave the valley and never return. But Cale ignored him completely. His eyes scanned the horizon, reading the clouds of dust and the echo of the call. Torin moved closer, whispering something urgent, telling Cale that danger was headed this way and that the council needed him now. Leora felt fear coil in her stomach. She could see conflict tearing Cale in two directions. Honor to his people on one side, a promise to her on the other. She stepped toward him gently, her voice soft enough for only him to hear. She told him she didn't want to be the reason he lost something important. She said she would find a way to face Calderon's threats, even if he had to leave. Cale's eyes burned with emotion, and for the first time, he reached for her hand. Just once, just long enough for her to feel the strength and warmth of his promise. He told her he would return. He told her this was not the end, but the valley was shifting too fast. The tension snapped higher with every heartbeat. The riders at the ridge grew closer. Calderon was ready to seize any moment of advantage. The townsfolk felt torn between fear and hope. Leora's father fell to his knees in guilt. The priest stepped back toward the chapel as if praying for guidance. Torin prepared his warriors for whatever approached. And Cale, standing in the center of it all, was left to make a choice that would change every life in the valley. He looked at Leora one final time. Then he turned toward the rising dust from the ridge, ready to face the danger closing in. The moment stretched tight, holding the entire valley on the edge of the unknown. Everything was about to break. The rising dust on the ridge thickened until shapes began forming through the haze. Cale held his ground, muscles tense as he tried to read the movement. Torin signaled his warriors to prepare, though none drew weapons yet. The valley felt ready to snap, suspended between fear and hope. Leora stood behind Cale, heart pounding, unsure whether she feared more for him or for what approached. Then the first rider broke through the dust. It was not a raiding force, not an enemy, not a threat. It was a young Apache scout, breathless and worn from travel. He called out that the smoke on the horizon had been mistaken. It was only a brush fire sweeping across abandoned ground, not an attack or enemy raid. The valley exhaled as one. The danger Cale had feared was fading. The scout explained that the council had sent a warning because the fire looked larger from a distance, but it no longer threatened the tribe or the settlers. Torin closed his eyes in brief relief. Calderon looked furious as the tension eased. He had hoped the rising fear would push Cale away. Instead, the warrior remained stronger than before. Cale stepped forward, determination settling across him like armor. He no longer fought two directions inside himself. The path was clear. Looked at Torin, who nodded with a calm acceptance. Torin knew Cale's heart had already made its choice, and the council would not stand against a man acting with honor. Calderon sensed control slipping completely from his hands. He shouted that the ceremony must continue and that he still held legal claim through the land document. But Rowan, who had returned quietly after circling back to town, stepped forward with new information. He revealed he had spoken to the commissioner's riders earlier that morning. The ownership dispute was still under review, meaning no land belonged to anyone until the investigation ended.
Calderon's claim was empty.
The crowd murmured loudly now. They saw through Calderon's lies. They saw how he tried to use fear and law to get what he wanted. Even his ranch hands stepped back, realizing they had supported a man who only cared for his own power. The priest approached, lifting his hand to calm the rising noise, told everyone the valley must stand with truth, not coercion, and that no union could be blessed if it was built on threats. Leora felt strength rise inside her. She stepped where everyone could see her, and said she would not marry Calderon. Her voice did not tremble. She said her family's land would never be taken through fear. She said she would fight for it with honesty, not with deals made in shadows. Her father stepped forward, tears filling his eyes. He apologized in front of everyone, saying he should have trusted his daughter's courage instead of giving in to fear. Leora embraced him, and the weight he carried for months lifted from his shoulders. Calderon tried one last time to pull the crowd to his side, but no one responded. The valley had turned away from him. Even the ranch hands put down their tools and walked several steps back, choosing freedom over blind loyalty. Calderon realized he stood alone. Cale approached him calmly, not with anger, but with a firm sense of justice. He told Calderon he would not seek revenge, but he would not allow him near Leora again. Calderon, defeated, glanced at the valley one last time. The people he thought he owned no longer feared him. His power was gone. He mounted his horse and rode away in silence, disappearing across the open land that he once believed belonged to him. The chapel grew quiet. The wind softened. The dust settled over footprints that marked the tension of the morning. Leora turned to Cale, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. He came for her without being called. He stood between her and danger without hesitation. She realized then that the bond they had formed in the old barn was not just a memory. It was a promise that had shaped both of their lives. Torrin approached them, his presence strong but gentle. He told Leora she had shown more courage than many warriors he knew. He told Cale that although the council had called him back, they would not punish a man who acted with honor. Cale bowed his head, thankful for Torrin's understanding. The warriors mounted their horses, ready to return home. Torrin looked at Leora one last time, as if acknowledging her place in Cale's path. Then he and his riders rode away, leaving Cale and Leora standing in the softening light. Leora turned toward her father, who still looked shaken but relieved. She promised him they would protect the ranch together. He nodded, saying he would never again let fear push him toward wrong choices. The townsfolk approached her warmly, offering help, support, and supplies to restore the ranch. Even those who had once stayed silent wanted to make things right. Leora felt her heart fill with hope she had not felt in a long time. Cale stood quietly, watching her speak to her community. He admired her strength, her kindness, her bravery. When she finally walked toward him, the crowd parted naturally, as if they understood the quiet bond that connected them. She reached him and held his hand, no longer afraid to show what her heart wanted. She told him he had saved her more than once. He told her she had saved him long before that, when she pulled him from the riverbed and gave him shelter. Said he did not come to claim her. He came because he could not let her face danger alone. Leora smiled softly and told him she did not want a savior. She wanted a partner who stood beside her, and she believed he already was that person. Cale felt warmth spread inside him. The valley had once felt divided between his world and hers. Now, it felt like open land, where two paths could finally meet. He asked if she wished him to stay until the land dispute settled. Leora said she wished for more than that. She wished for him to be part of the life she wanted to build. Cale's eyes softened and he nodded, accepting her words with a quiet joy that felt stronger than any shout. The priest approached gently and told them that if someday they wished for a union built on choice rather than force, the valley would stand behind them. Leora blushed and Cale bowed respectfully, but they did not rush. They wanted their bond to grow naturally, shaped by the land, by trust, and by love that did not need to be claimed through fear. As days passed, the valley healed from the turmoil. Rowan returned with official news that the commissioner would restore land rights based on original boundaries, meaning Leora's ranch was safe. Calderon never returned. His estate was left in the hands of workers who divided it fairly among themselves. The town grew stronger from unity rather than fear. Cale helped rebuild fences and fields, working beside Leora and her father daily. The people grew to admire him, not as a warrior from another world, but as a man who brought fairness and strength. Children followed him around the ranch, asking stories of the plains. Elders nodded at his respect for the land. Leora's heart grew warmer each day, as she saw how he blended with the world she fought to protect. One evening, as the sky burned gold and purple, Cale and Leora stood at the edge of her ranch. The wind carried the scent of warm earth. Leora placed her hand in his. She thanked him for storming into her life with the courage she wished she had sooner. Cale smiled quietly and said she had always carried courage. She just needed someone to remind her of it. They watched the sun set together, peaceful at last, knowing the valley was no longer a place of fear, but a place where their futures could take root. Their story became one the valley whispered with pride, a story of freedom, love, and the strength to stand for what was right. And under the warm, fading sky, Kale and Leora chose each other, not through force or fear, but through a bond that had grown from honesty, sacrifice, and a promise that neither of them would ever face the world alone again.